and welcome to another lecture of Econ 2302, Principles of Microeconomics. This lecture covers Chapter 7 of your book, which goes over consumer choice using utility theory. Utility theory is actually one of my favorite parts of economics, specifically because it deals with behavioral finance so much. So up until now, we've been talking about how consumers are price sensitive and producers can lower price and therefore expect different results. Well, there is also the other side of that, and that's utility. And utility is the satisfaction we get from buying a good, consuming a good. It's pretty simple. We've talked about it a lot, but we're going to talk about it more extensively in this chapter. So utility is just the happiness you get. You might as well equate it to that from buying something. And we state in economics that the consumer is going to maximize their utility. They're always going to do that. Whatever decision they make, we would say that they're rational and they're going to make the best decision based on their given information, and they're going to maximize their utility. Now, that doesn't mean that they won't have buyer's remorse. We're just talking about the instant that they consume something. And the way we try to make utility more quantitative, because it is very qualitative in nature, and qualitative just means it's intangible, it's hard to measure. It's more of the feelings, the behavioral aspect of it versus the numeric aspect of it. So trying to make utility more quantitative, we would state that we measure it in utils. And you see there it's just one unit of utility. And so when I refer to utils, that's what I'm talking about. I want to point out that it's very, very difficult to measure, but we still try to get a grasp on it because it's more of theory, it's theoretical, it's kind of an advanced aspect of looking at it. We're not going to be able to numerically say this is exactly what happens, but we get a good idea, and by using very different mathematical models, and we're going to cover those, and they're not too difficult, we can see how you're going to buy things and what your preferences might be. So this graph just simply shows you the inverse relationship with total utility and marginal utility as you buy things. Now we say that your total utility keeps increasing, but marginal utility is going to decrease each time. And what that just is stating is a fancy way of saying there's diminishing returns with utility, and we'll look at that coming up. So marginal utility, that's just the change in total utility from one additional unit of goods. We've talked about margin a lot in this course. We'll keep talking about it. Margin is one additional. So utility, if we put those two together, we've got our vernacular together. We state its marginal utility is the happiness I get from buying one more good, the satisfaction I get from consuming one more good. The law of diminishing utility. I want you to really pay close to this because it's vital to utility theory. And that's the law of diminishing marginal utility. Just like the law of diminishing returns, where output increases at a decreasing rate, we know that with consumption, as it increases, marginal utility decreases. So as it increases, it will decrease. What that means is if I were, and I've given this example a few times, were to buy 2 or 3 Denver Bronco jerseys signed by John Elway, Denver Bronco jerseys, each time I would get more and more happiness, but not as much happiness as the first jersey that my wife gave me as a wedding present. That was really special to me. Well, if I keep buying them over and over and over again, then each one gives me a little bit less satisfaction. That's why our demand curve is sloping has a negative slope, slopes down, is because of the law of diminishing marginal utility. So how do we measure it? And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I am going to spend enough time that you kind of grasp what we're talking about. A budget line is just the line connecting the combinations of two goods that exhaust the consumer's budget. Let me try to put that in more layman's terms. A budget line is your income. If you were to take your take-home pay after taxes, your disposable income, and spend it all on 2 different types of things, you only get 2 options, that's your budget line. Don't really pay close attention to the budget set. I don't think I'm going to ask any questions on the exam about it. All it is the points in which we plot the graph for the budget line. Your budget line, you might as well say, is your budget constraint. I like that a lot more than budget line. The book uses budget line. In my graduate program, we always called it budget constraint because that's the max amount you can spend on 2 different goods. So if we were to plot a graph, let's just say this one is one of books per month and movies per month, and we have a limited amount of money, and we can buy with our money 30 books and 0 movies, or we can buy a max of, let me get my pen out and see if this works. We can buy a max of 10 movies, but it would equal 0 books if we do that. And so we can see that movies cost 3 times as much as books, according to this budget. Or we can maximize it, our utility at any point on this budget constraint or budget line. At this point right here that I'm highlighting, we would see 15 books and 5 movies per month. What that tells me, essentially, is that anywhere on this line, I'm given 2 choices, and if I maximize my utility by consuming as much as possible between books and movies, I'm given a choice between the various 2. This is really just another way of saying opportunity cost. Remember, opportunity cost, which we covered in chapter, I believe, 2, and what you give up when you consume something. So every time I consume one book, I'm giving up a movie, and vice versa. Alright, making choices using the equal marginal rule. Now this will be on your exam, and we're going to go through it real quickly. But the equal marginal rule is you're going to always pick the combination of 2 activities where marginal benefit per dollar of the first activity equals the second. So what does that mean? Let me erase this real quickly. What that means, essentially, and this is how I'm going to write it because I like doing it this way. Marginal utility of X, and we're going to call these goods 2 goods. Good X. I'm getting a little bit better with writing with the mouse. And good Y. I say that and then I write sloppily. That's okay. Good X and good Y. So we have the marginal utility of good X divided by the price of good X equals the marginal utility, or mu, of good Y divided by the price of good Y. We're always going to pick the combination where these 2 equal each other. If they don't, we're going to consume the one that gives us more utility. So on the next slide, we're actually I'm going to go a little bit further. Let's look. I'm going to skip through a few because I want to show you an example. Alright, this application, it's actually in your book, it's application 1, chapter 7. In response to the obesity problem among young people, some policymakers, those in Congress, have proposed, and specifically New York City, the mayor proposed a tax on soft drinks. They're responsible for 10% of calorie intakes of adolescents. So what they're saying is what we should do is tax the price of soft drinks. That didn't come out looking like I wanted it to, but essentially we're going to increase the tax on soft drinks, and therefore people are going to choose something else over it. Well, we can use the equal marginal rule to figure out how that works. And for this example, what I'm going to do, first off, let's say that good X is the soft drink. So let's say for the soft drink, we get a marginal utility of 12. So we have 12. Now, let's say that the cost per drink is 50 cents. So I'm going to call this good X marginal utility, so MUX equals 12, and that's 12 utils. Man, I am not as good as I thought I was at writing this. Oh well. 12 utils, and then the marginal utility of Y is our juice. And let's just say that it is 10 utils. I know this isn't going exactly with what the application says, but there's a reason for it. And let's say that the price of the good was, so let's say price of X was 60 cents, and price of good Y, or the juice, so we'll call this one juice right here. This is soda drink, and this is juice, equals 50 cents. So how do we set this up? Well, here's how it would look. We'd have the marginal utility of good X divided by the price of good X. And does it equal, set it equal to the marginal utility of good Y divided by the price of good Y. So what I'm going to do is sub in for these right here the equation. So let's get our eraser out. We're going to erase this, and we're going to sub in for those two things, or those actually 4 variables. So here we go. My marginal utility of X right here is 12 utils. So what I would do is write 12 and divide it by my price of good X, which is 60 cents, and that equals marginal utility of good Y right here, 10, and we're going to divide that one out by the 50 cents, so the price of good Y, and these would both end up equaling, let's see, I believe, do my math real quick, let's say 20, but let me make sure real quick. It's Friday and I'm a little bit slow today, but I want to say it's 20. Yeah, I was right, 20. So we've got 20 equals 20. So we've got 20 utils here. I'm going to just write it as U equals 20 utils. So that's pretty self-explanatory. What if, though, we taxed it and raised up the price? Ceteris paribus. Remember, ceteris paribus is holding everything else equal. Well, if we raised up the price right here, and let's just say that we raised it to where it's 80 cents now. So a 30% tax, and I know this doesn't exactly go with this, but we're just trying to do a different type of example that you can look at. Let's see. What we would state is that 12 divided by 0.8 equals, and I know this one, it's 15 utils. Now we've got 2 different marginal utilities, or utils, amount of utilities, that affect us, right? And so we're going to choose the one that gives us the most utility. And if we have 15 or 20, I'll write that up at the top of the screen, we know that 15 is less than 20, and we're going to always choose this thing that gives us the most utility. We're going to maximize utility. We're now going to pick the juice. And that's the whole idea behind this. Taxing, the sin tax on cigarettes, the gas tax, things like that. The excise taxes on cigarettes, smoking. I'm trying to think of other ones. There's ones on gas. I want to say some natural resources besides gas. Things like that. We're thinking about doing the carbon tax, things like that. All right. So that's one idea behind it, and I'm going to talk about a little bit later why people don't just stop smoking. The individual demand curve, you should know this by now. We're not going to rehash that very much, but it shows, I don't know why that started highlighting. Sorry about that. Still doing it. Okay, there we go. Oh, now I've got a laser pointer. Hey, that's pretty cool. Okay, the marginal utility just shows us that we're going to maximize utility, and as the price goes down, we're going to consume more, etc., but we're going to get less utility. So the individual demand curve shows a relationship between the price of a good and the rational consumer. Maximizing utility. That's what I really want you to get from this slide right here, minus the technical difficulties that I'm having, is that we're going to maximize utility. So we're going to keep going and keep going as long as it keeps bringing us utility. All right, here's what I was getting at with the smoking, and why do people keep smoking if we tax it and tax it and tax it? Because marginal utility equal marginal rule would state that the good of one good, if it brings us more utility, we're going to choose that good over the other. Well, we have what's known as a substitution effect, and that's the change in quantity consumed that is caused by a change in the relative price of a good with real income held constant. So in other words, we might substitute other goods out. For instance, let's say you started raising the price of cigarettes by $1, $2, $3. We're going to see a substitution effect where we start consuming less, right? That's a substitution effect. We're going to consume less. However, what we might see is we substitute other goods out. And what I mean by that is you might buy less milk because that doesn't give you as much utility. And so therefore your utility theory would state that the marginal utility, whichever gives you the most. And regarding our budget constraint, we only have two options. In the real world, we have many, 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 many options. And so we might see a substitution effect where because the change in a price of one good leads to a change in quantity. An income effect is a little bit different. An income effect is a change in quantity consumed that is caused by a change in real income with relative prices held constant. This has to do with your income and not the price level that's changed. What that means is, let's say I got a raise. I'm going to consume more, or I'm going to consume different types of products. I may go from the cheap milk to the more expensive milk. I may go from Taco Bell to eating at Leal's or Abuela's, something like that. Or vice versa, instead of government taxing the price of a good, they're taxing my whole income. So they raise my taxes, I may consume a lot less. That's an income effect. I want you to know the difference between substitution and income effect, and it all has to do with two things. One is the relative price of the good, and the other is the change in real income. So if we tax the price of a specific good, that's going to be a substitution effect. Whereas if we tax yourself and your overall income, that's going to be an income effect. And assuming that you consume less or more based on which way we tax. This just gives you a good example, table 7.2, how the income and substitution effects based on marginal utility and the prices of goods. So an example of substitution effect on gasoline tax. This kind of shows you where we stand. So if the government raises the gasoline tax and cuts income taxes, will gasoline consumption raise? Well, actually, if what they're doing is raising the gasoline tax and lowering your real income, we might not actually see a change because relatively nothing changed, right? Whereas if they do one or the other, we would see something. So this gives you an example of that. The price of gas after the tax and the equal marginal rule would state that holding everything else equal, ceteris paribus, 12 divided by 6 is now 2. I'm using my highlighter because it works simple. 3 divided by 1 is 3. We're going to choose the thing that gives us the most utility, maximizes utility. So therefore, after the tax is imposed and only a tax is imposed without the income, we're going to choose the thing that gives us the most utility. So citizens will cut back on gasoline and spend money on other good. That's known as a substitution effect. It's not based on our income taxes, right? It's based on the fact that we're only taxing the gasoline. All right, if you have any questions, feel free to email me. My email address is jkemper@southplains.college.edu. You can always hit me up on Twitter @Mr. Kemper. Thank you and have a nice day.